How does a distinguished judge end up face down on burning pavement because of one officer's reckless mistake? Funny how a simple, seemingly harmless choice, a turn into a parking lot, a craving for coffee, can become the spark that sets your entire world ablaze. That's exactly what happened one quiet Thursday evening in Modesto, California. There wasn't some grand event. No sirens, no shouts, no obvious threat. Just a man pulling into a familiar cafe lot after a long day. No crime committed. No warning signs. Just fatigue and routine. Judge Preston Holloway had wrapped up a grueling 12-hour stretch at the Stanislaus County Courthouse. He was mentally drained, stomach grumbling, and craving a brief moment of peace. So he made a small detour to his usual coffee spot, a cozy little cafe called Jackson's Brews tucked near McHenry Avenue. The kind of place where your name's remembered, your drinks started before you speak, and kindness still lives in the small things, like holding the door open for strangers. Everything about it was ordinary, except just a few blocks away, a dispatch crackled through a police radio. Suspect reported, male, dark jacket, dark pants, last seen heading south. That was it. No face, no vehicle, just vague descriptors. And the only thing Judge Holloway had in common with that report was his skin color and a navy blazer. That slim thread would unravel into chaos. At the same moment, Officer Kyle Merritt was cruising down the avenue. New to the job, 27, full of ambition, and already flagged for excessive force complaints. He didn't see a respected judge. He saw a potential caller. He saw an opportunity to prove something. Maybe to his superiors. Maybe to himself. Preston never noticed the squad car that coasted in behind him. His thoughts were wrapped around something simple: blueberry muffin or just the usual latte. But before he could open the cafe door, the moment twisted. A voice barked from behind him. Hands where I can see them. Preston spun, startled. At first, he thought it wasn't directed at him. Was there a robbery nearby? He scanned the street. No signs of trouble, except the cop storming toward him with one hand hovering near his weapon. Sir? Preston asked, his tone steady but confused. Hands up. Now, the officer yelled again, louder this time. Heads turned. A man in gym clothes paused mid-step. A group of teens outside the yogurt shop froze, one lifting their phone. Instinct and years of courtroom control told Preston to stay calm. He raised his hand slowly, palms out. He noticed the officer's clenched jaw, the adrenaline pumping through his neck. Merritt was locked in. The judge tried to speak, to explain, but it didn't matter. In seconds, he was yanked backward, forced onto the pavement, cheek pressed to the sizzling asphalt. A knee pinned his spine. His briefcase had fallen. His dignity stripped away in public, in daylight, over a latte run gone violently wrong. And then came the phones. Half a dozen bystanders recorded every second. But it wasn't the takedown that exploded across social media. It was the realization that followed. Gasps rippled through the crowd as someone shouted, "Yo, that's Judge Holloway." The atmosphere shifted instantly. From disbelief to outrage. From silence to yelling. The very idea that a superior court judge, a man sworn to uphold the law, could be cuffed like a street criminal for doing absolutely nothing, it shattered illusions. Moments earlier, the air had smelled of roasted coffee beans and exhaust fumes. Now it reeked of fear, confusion, and growing anger. Before it all happened, Preston had stepped out of his silver SUV just like always. The sky above was streaked with that dusty orange haze that settles over central California at sunset. Around him, life had been ordinary. A mother juggling a toddler, teens joking by the curb, a man laughing into his phone. It was peaceful. He'd loosened his tie, sighed through the tension in his back, and thought of the families he'd tried to help that day. Hard cases, torn custody, last chances before prison, tired mothers fighting to keep a roof over their heads. It weighed on him. But right then, all he wanted was a coffee and a moment to breathe. Instead, he got a lesson in how fast justice can vanish when your skin matches a suspect's and nothing else. And that moment, filmed, shared, dissected, would set off a storm that wouldn't just stay in Modesto. It would ignite conversations from City Hall to national newsrooms. Not because Preston was special, but because what happened to him proved that no one is immune, not even the man who wears the robe. Preston recognized that look instantly, fear pretending to be authority. "I'm Judge Preston Holloway," he said, voice firm but not aggressive. "I'm not armed. I'm just reaching for my wallet." "Don't move," the officer snapped, already closing in fast. Preston froze. His heart pounded like a drum. This wasn't going to be a conversation. He could sense it. Before he could speak again, the officer grabbed him, slammed him against the hood of the cruiser, and clamped cold metal cuffs around his wrists. That's when people started noticing. The handcuffs dug into Preston's skin as the officer pressed him harder onto the scorching hood. The heat radiated from the engine, burning through the fabric of his shirt. In his mind, Preston could hear his own courtroom voice, the one he used to calm a room. Stay still. Stay alive. I already told you. I'm a judge, he said, this time more urgently. My wallet's in my jacket. My ID is right there. The officer ignored him. His hands searched roughly through Preston's coat, pulling it open, sending keys and a phone clattering to the ground. Around them, phones started going up, cameras blinking like watchful eyes. A woman in yoga pants stepped closer, recording. He didn't do anything. Why are you arresting him? She called out. Step back, ma'am. The officer barked, eyes never leaving Preston. A knee pressed into Preston's spine. He gritted his teeth, but didn't fight. He'd seen officers like this before. Young, jumpy, desperate to control whatever they could. You've got the wrong man, Preston said, keeping his breath steady. I'm Judge Holloway. Superior Court. You're making a major mistake. Still no acknowledgement. The wallet lay just feet away, untouched. No radio call. No verification. Just the officer's tunnel vision. Control at all costs. The small crowd grew. Two teens whispered, one filming, the other saying, Yo, that's the judge. My mom always talks about him. Inside the coffee shop, a barista named Ellie Franco watched through the glass, eyes wide. She recognized Preston. He came in all the time. Always ordered a tall black coffee. Sometimes a scone, if he was feeling indulgent. Hey, someone shouted from nearby. A mechanic in a grease-stained jumpsuit. That's Judge Holloway. You got the wrong guy. The officer's jaw clenched. He matches the suspect's description. Step back. We're handling this. Preston twisted his head slightly, trying to meet the officer's eyes. You're handling it wrong, he said softly. It wasn't the words that shook the officer, it was the tone. Calm, certain, unshaken. It made him feel small. Suddenly, another patrol car screeched into the parking lot. Sergeant Dana Winslow stepped out, moving fast. Kyle, what is going on? She demanded. Matched the description. Black male, dark clothes, mid-50s. She glanced from Preston's face to the wallet on the ground. Her eyes narrowed. She picked it up, opened it, then froze. Oh my God, she muttered. Spinning to face the officer, she said, Take those cuffs off him. Now. The officer hesitated. Now, Officer Merritt. His hands shook as he removed the cuffs. Preston straightened slowly, rolling his stiff shoulders. Red welts marked his wrists. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just looked at the officer with something deeper than anger, disappointment. Sergeant Winslow pulled him aside. Judge Holloway, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. Preston's lips were tight. Control your officers better, Sergeant. I know. Believe me, I know. But the damage was done. The videos were already online, spreading like wildfire. Officer Merritt stood stiff and silent, eyes fixed on the ground. Around him, people recorded, murmured, shook their heads. The weight of shame hung in the air. Preston didn't storm away. He didn't raise his voice. He picked up his keys, his phone, and his wallet, brushed off his slacks, and walked into the coffee shop. He still needed that coffee. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and roasted beans wrapped around him. Ellie handed over a tall black coffee with trembling hands. It's on the house, Judge, she whispered. Preston managed a tired smile. Thanks, Ellie. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with voices and motion. More cars rolled in. People parked wherever they could, rushing over to ask what happened. News vans weren't far behind. From the window, Preston watched it unfold, sipping his coffee. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything he symbolized: justice, dignity, balance, being thrown to the pavement by a man with a badge and something to prove. Merritt stood off to the side, arms crossed, face unreadable. He knew he had messed up. He just didn't know how far this would go. In her cruiser, Sergeant Winslow was already on the radio with dispatch and her superior. She wasn't softening anything: wrongful detainment, excessive force, high-profile individual. Every phrase landed like a blow. Back inside, Preston checked his phone. Not to call anyone, just to see. Texts and missed calls lit up the screen. Colleagues, friends, even the mayor's office. The video was everywhere. A teen with a skateboard walked in, eyes wide. "That cop's done," he mumbled, not to anyone in particular. Preston put the phone away and stared out the window. For a second, the coffee tasted bitter. Then another siren cut through the noise, sharper, higher pitched, the kind that signaled something different. Internal affairs. 3 plainclothes officers stepped out of an unmarked car, moving with purpose. They weren't here to support Merritt. They were here to investigate him. Sergeant Winslow met them halfway, visibly relieved. One of them, a stocky man with a close-cropped haircut, walked into the cafe. He showed a badge. "Judge Holloway? I'm Lieutenant Shaw. Internal Affairs. I know this isn't easy, but would you be willing to give a statement?" Preston sipped his coffee again. Part of him wanted to just leave. Let the system fix its own mess. But that wasn't how change happened. "I'll give you a statement," he said. "And I'm filing a formal complaint. Don't think for a second this will be buried." Shaw nodded. "Understood." Across the cafe, Ellie wiped a spotless counter, stealing glances at Preston. The cafe was packed, but no one was chatting or laughing. They were watching something important unfold. Outside, Merritt was finally told to hand over his badge and firearm, in front of everyone. His face cracked for a second, but he masked it quickly, slipping his weapon into the evidence bag handed to him. "You're putting me on leave?" he asked, voice breaking slightly. "Effective immediately," Lieutenant Shaw said. "Pending full investigation." The crowd murmured. A few clapped. Most just looked weary. It wasn't celebration. It was exhaustion. How many times had they seen something like this before? Preston stepped outside, coffee still in hand. Cameras turned toward him, but he didn't speak. Not yet. He stood quietly, watching as Merritt was led to an internal affairs cruiser. No cuffs. Funny, Preston thought. Funny how that worked. Sergeant Winslow approached with hesitation. "Judge Holloway," she began, remorse thick in her voice. "I can't say sorry enough." He raised his hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "Save it for later, Sergeant. Right now, you've got a department to lead." She gave a small nod, shame etched across her face. Preston scanned the growing crowd. Faces unfamiliar, but eyes that understood. They didn't know his name, but they knew his story. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice steady but clear. "I know what's running through your minds," he said, letting the words carry. "You're wondering how many times this scene has to play out before it finally ends. Why someone who upholds the law ends up treated like a suspect without cause." He shook his head slightly. "I don't have simple answers. But I'll tell you this isn't the end. Not even close." He didn't need to say more. The truth was already written in the weariness in the crowd's eyes. But what Preston couldn't know, not yet, was that this moment would ignite something far greater than one incident. It would send shockwaves through the city, reshaping conversations, careers, and policies. By sunrise, Modesto wasn't just a place. It was a headline. Local news led with it. National outlets picked it up before noon. Video of a calm, composed Judge Preston Holloway being forced onto a police car, hood played in a constant loop. At City Hall, officials scrambled, trying to manage a crisis they barely understood. Press statements were drafted, emergency meetings called, apologies prepared. This wasn't just about one officer making a terrible call. This was about the system, who it protected and who it punished without hesitation. Amid the frenzy, Preston stayed quiet. He didn't want to be a public figure. He had no interest in press conferences, social media campaigns, or op-eds. He wanted one thing, the truth. A formal investigation into Officer Kyle Merritt's conduct launched that same week. Preston's complaint led the stack, backed by countless witness videos. But it didn't stop there. The California Department of Justice began a full audit, scrutinizing training practices, use of force protocols, and internal disciplinary systems. Meanwhile, Merritt sat at home, unpaid and suspended. He watched as talking heads dissected his actions, his record, even his past. It was no longer just a bad night, it was a reckoning. 3 days later, a town hall was held at the Modesto Community Center. Hundreds filled the seats. Some came out of anger. Others came out of cautious hope. A few came just because they were tired of the same stories. Preston attended, seated quietly in the third row, baseball cap pulled low. He declined to speak. Instead, he listened. One after another, people stepped up to the mic. Teachers, students, nurses, veterans, young men who spoke of being stopped for walking home, mothers who talked about teaching their children a survival script, not about love or growing up, but about surviving a routine traffic stop. Then, a voice cut through the silence. An elderly woman with silver hair and a strong, raspy voice stepped up. "I'm 74, she said. I marched in Selma. I sat at counters where they dumped hot coffee on me. I fought so my grandkids wouldn't have to live in fear of a badge." The room went still. Only the hum of ceiling fans filled the silence. "I'm tired," she continued, "but I'm still here. And if Judge Holloway can stand after what they did to him, so can we." Preston swallowed hard. He hadn't cried. Not when the cuffs went on, not when the footage went viral. But here, listening to that woman, something caught in his throat. A sharp, quiet burn behind his eyes. That night ended with a vote. A citizen oversight committee would be formed to monitor law enforcement practices. It wasn't justice. It wasn't even closure. But it was something. A beginning. The following week, Preston returned to court. Same building. Same bench. Same expectations. But the air felt different. Guards nodded with more weight behind their greetings. Officers stood a bit taller. The whispers weren't sneers anymore. They sounded more like respect. Or maybe fear. Officer Merritt's disciplinary hearing was scheduled for the following month. Termination was likely. Criminal charges were possible, depending on what surfaced. But Preston wasn't waiting on a verdict to drive change. He booked meetings with the police chief, the mayor, the district attorney. He didn't rant. He didn't grandstand. He came prepared, with solutions, reforms, training recommendations. He didn't want payback. He wanted a world where someone like him could stop for coffee without being seen as a threat. Preston knew the truth. Big changes rarely come from one dramatic moment. They're won in quiet, persistent efforts, day by day. Weeks passed, then months. But the momentum didn't fade. The footage of his wrongful detainment wasn't just viral. It was transformational. Departments adjusted their policies. Officers were retrained on de-escalation, accountability, and human dignity. When the investigation ended, Merritt was fired. No charges were filed, but his career in law enforcement was over. No farewell ceremony. No job in the next county over. Just cardboard boxes and a quiet exit. Meanwhile, Preston remained on the bench. Same robes. Same gavel. Same commitment to justice. But he carried himself differently now. Not louder, just deeper. With more gravity, more care, more resolve. That spring, he spoke at a youth forum at Modesto High. The gym was packed with teens. Some saw him as a hero. Others were just curious. A skinny boy in the front raised his hand. "When that officer put his knee on you, why didn't you fight back?" The gym fell quiet. Preston let the question linger before answering. "Because fighting back wouldn't have changed his mind," he said calmly. "It would have only made things worse. For me, for everyone watching. Sometimes strength isn't about reacting. It's about staying so still, so steady, that the truth becomes impossible to ignore." He looked across the rows of young faces. "That's how you win," he said, "by refusing to become the villain in their story." Later, as he packed up to leave, a girl approached him. Small, determined, hair pulled tight into a ponytail. "Judge Holloway," she said, clutching a notebook, "I'm going to be a lawyer someday." He smiled, weary but proud. "I believe you," he said. "And when you are fight smart, not just hard." She nodded and ran back to her friends. Walking out of the school, Preston felt something shift inside him. Maybe he wasn't just fixing broken policies. Maybe he was helping raise a generation that wouldn't need to be so cautious just to stay alive. The fight wasn't over. It likely wouldn't end in his lifetime. But change was real, and it always had to start somewhere. In parking lots, in courtrooms, in classrooms, anywhere people stood up and said, "No more." And that, Preston thought, was worth showing up for. Real change doesn't happen from a single flash of outrage. It happens when people stay in the fight, calm, steady, relentless. Speak up. Stay grounded. Fight wisely. And make it impossible for injustice to hide. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be silent.